Afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me okay? All right. My name is Colm Divilly. I work with Oracle. I lead the development of a product called Oracle REST Data Services. And today I'm going to talk about how we use that product to REST enable the Oracle database. Okay? I'll be touching on a few future features. To show you the safe harbor statement, okay? Okay, so as I said, I work with Oracle. I've been leading the development of the product for a number of years, and I've been working on REST APIs for about a decade now, and based in Ireland. So today's talk, I'm going to start with a bit of an overview of what Oracle REST Data Services is. Actually, I'm really going to focus on what REST is and what it does for you, okay? And then I'm going to go into installing the product, just to show how quick and easy it is to install it. And then I'm going to take you through using some of its features to enable a tabular view, and then doing some more advanced APIs. And we'll finish with a quick demo of an application that's built using Oracle REST Data Services to provide the API, and Oracle Jet, which is Oracle's GUI framework for the web, to talk to that REST API. If you've any questions at any stage, feel free to shout them out, okay? So, to address the first question that comes up when the term REST is introduced. That's the first question. What does REST give me? And really, the shortest answer that I can give to that question is that it gives your API usability, okay? You can build an API without adopting the principles of REST. It will work, but it won't be as usable as if you did adopt the principles of REST. So REST is not a protocol, it's not a specification, it's what's called an architectural style. It's a set of loose principles to help guide you in designing a good web API, okay? So on the topic of usability of APIs, I was just wondering, does anybody remember Visual Basic? Right, okay. I think we were pretty much all there, right? Do you remember when it came out, how much it seemed to change things? In terms of, before that point, programming was pretty much inaccessible to anybody who didn't have programming experience. And this started to break down that wall and let people who didn't define themselves primarily as developers to actually start build applications, okay? And any feedback on why that was the case? What was the feature of Visual Basic that enabled that?
It's intuitive.
Yeah, it's intuitive. And where did that intuitiveness come from?
Good design.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think that it's the usability of it, right? You could just pick it up and figure it out, and you didn't have to spend months or weeks learning it. You didn't have to deep dive into into manuals and books and whatever to get going with it, okay? I think the key thing to Visual Basic's usability was that all of the components that you worked with were self-describing. So that's what I've tried to show here in this screenshot. If you remember this property browser that you would have, it would show you all the properties of the object. You could change them. There was validation on them. It would let you change them to legal values, prevent you from putting in illegal values. And you could do that for any component. So you could look at a component and understand what its attributes were, what its methods were, all of that kind of stuff, without having to leave the editor. And at the time, that was a big step, because before you just had a text editor. And if you wanted to read how to use your programming language, you had to pick up like a dead tree and open it and look at the index and look for the keyword, try and guess that there might be a keyword for the thing that you wanted to do, and find the page and go to it and read about it. And, you know, nobody does that anymore. We take it for granted that all systems work like this, but there was a time when they didn't. And I think that concept of the fact that it described itself and it lets you navigate your way around the API was key. Okay? That technology was called OLE. I presume that's kind of a play on words on hello. I duplicated my slide, sorry. So self-describing APIs kind of took over, okay? Once Visual Basic came out, Turbo Pascal became Delphi. It gained the same kind of introspection and GUI abilities. Java came along, and Java had reflection built into the language itself, so all of the objects in Java are naturally self-describing through the reflection API. Javadoc is built into the whole ecosystem of it, so you can generate hyperlinked HTML documentation for your API, so you can immediately produce useful, navigable documentation for your API. Colm went through all of Microsoft's stack. And even there's something very similar to Colm, or shares a lot of concepts, is called interface description language. It actually predates Colm by quite a bit. But that lives on today, and the document object model that you have in browsers, all of that is specified through IDL specifications by the W3C consortium. And it's the same principle. You get a document object, and beneath that you can get all of the elements that are in the document, and you can iterate down through those, and they all tell you, what properties they have, what methods they have, what events they generate, and you can bind to the event handlers and all of that kind of stuff. So again, it's very self-describing. But I think we all notice that we don't really do component-based GUI development today, like we did in, say, 1994 or whatever, whenever VB would have been at the height of its powers, okay? And there's a reason that is the case. It's because the World Wide Web came along, and that took over, and HTML and HTTP took over. And initially, we tried to bridge that object model to the web, and we introduced things like Corba and RMI. And what we found was that they don't really work in that model, because the component object model is very chatty, and that doesn't work over a network that's slow and laggy, okay? And so we tried it with SOAP and XML, and that worked a bit better, but still not great. And then, roughly around 2005, 2006, you had people like Twitter, Google, Facebook, and Oracle start to take notice of REST and how it could be a paradigm for how you could design a web API that was navigable, that was self-describing, that was easy to use and to understand. So how does REST give us usability? One of the key concepts of REST is this uniform behavior, okay? You have a very small set of operations: posting for creating a resource, get for reading a resource, put for replacing or updating a resource, and delete for delete. Which is just like CRUD in the database world, okay? So there's a strong parallel there between the way that the folks evolving REST decided to model the world. There's a strong parallel with how databases model the world, okay? Basically, what they're both saying is that you can modify any data storage system as a set of create, read, update, and delete operations, okay? It also helps that there's a small standard set of error codes. My application will have the same set of error codes as yours does. We don't all have different codes, and we all have to go look up different manuals to figure out what they mean. They've been able to classify the most common set of error conditions and standardize their error codes. And then it's navigable because you can put a URL in a browser and you'll get a resource back. And if it's a good REST resource, it'll have hyperlinks in it that take you to the next resource that you would want to get to from that. So you might have a list of orders, and it'll come back with hyperlinks that point to each order item in that order, okay? And so on, and you can drill down, it'll take you links back to the product and all of that kind of stuff. Whereas if you don't have that, those links, you have to know about the existence of all of those entities ahead of time somehow. And you have to figure out, well, okay, if I have the unique ID of that item, how do I actually go and retrieve it? And you have to build up a URL yourself. Okay? And there's another downside to that, which I didn't really want to dwell on today, which is that if you are constructing URIs yourself, then you are coupling yourself to the current behavior of the server. And if the server needs to change its behavior for any reason, it has no way to communicate to you that you just can't get that URL anymore or whatever, or it's moved somewhere else. Whereas if the server is sending back hyperlinks, then it's telling you where the resource is. You're not presuming where it is. And it can change where the resource is located if it needs to, And so that gives you a bit of flexibility to evolve your API over time. And clients and servers on the web always evolve at different rates, okay? So that's an important attribute. Okay, so I just wanted to move, that's enough on the principles of REST. The next thing I wanted to do was to demonstrate installing the product and just walk you through that. I'm going to turn my Wi-Fi on and off because I remember last time I did a talk, my Wi-Fi looked like it was connected, but it didn't actually work. So Oracle REST data services can be downloaded from the OTN website. We have a short URL, oracle.com/rest, which will redirect to the actual OTN page. Okay, so we have the downloads, we have our documentation, we have a full doc library on docs.oracle.com. Okay, and I'll go back and show you. Sorry. Go to the Downloads tab. You can accept the license and download the product. It's a 46 megabyte download. It's not too big. It's a Java application. It can either run in an application server. The application servers we support are Tomcat and Oracle WebLogic. And it can also run in what we call a standalone mode. We bundle another application server called Jetty in the download, and that lets you run ORDS by itself. And that's what I'm going to do today. And that makes it very easy to get up and running with the product straight away. You don't have to learn WebLogic, you don't have to learn Tomcat. You just run a couple of commands and you'll be up and running in no time. Okay, so I have already downloaded the product. Okay, and I'm going to open my shell here. And that's pretty small, so I'm going to view bigger, so Command plus.
Do you also support Glassfish? I heard that.
We do support Glassfish. Glassfish is now an open source product. It's not officially supported. You cannot buy support, is my understanding, from Oracle anymore. So we don't really target Glassfish hugely anymore. We haven't. Our customers break down into if they're going to have an enterprise deployment, they'll go with WebLogic. And if they're going to go with something smaller, a departmental solution or whatever, they want to run an app server of their own, they're going to use Tomcat. Okay. Okay. Right. Let's move that back over there. Okay, so you can read that okay at the back. Let me clear the screen. Okay. So this is the command to install ORDS, okay? So, I should do one step before that. I want to unzip the download that I downloaded. Okay, it's going to extract all those files. And then I will do java-jar ords.war, okay? And that's just a Java command to run a Java archive. Okay. And it's going to, actually I'm going to Control-C that because obviously I was rehearsing before this, and I probably have left my configuration folder there, so I want to remove that so you get the same experience as I did. Okay, so we need a folder where we're going to store the configuration data. I'm just going to write it to /tmp. It'll go when I reboot this machine next. It doesn't really matter, but you pick a location of your choice. Okay. Okay, so now it's going to prompt me for a few questions. It's going to ask me about my database and how to connect to it. And then when it's done that, and it's going to provide defaults, so I can just press return. Press 1 for a database service name. So in older times you would use an Oracle SID. These days you should be always using an Oracle service name. So that's the default option. I'm going to put in my service name. And it's going to ask me for the password of a user that might or might not exist on the database. It will exist if you've already installed ORDS before. This is a low privileged user that we use to proxy to the actual schema where the REST service is defined. Okay, I'm going to put in the password. It's going to go off and check and see that that user didn't exist. So now it's going to ask me for this sys credentials so that we can install the ORDS metadata into the database. Okay. Now the next question we're asking here is if we want to add PL/SQL gateway support. You need this if you're using Oracle Application Express. That's how Oracle Application Express talks to the web. Okay. For our demo today, we're doing just Oracle REST services. We don't need this, so I'm just going to skip this step. Okay, and that's going to skip me a bunch of prompts. And now it's going into installing into the database. There is maybe less than 20 tables in the database that we install into it. It's very small. It's just for tracking the definitions of the REST services that you've created, okay? And now it's asking me, do I want to run this application in standalone mode, which is the embedded Jetty mode that I talked about earlier. So I'll say yes. Okay, now it's asking me, do I want to use HTTP or HTTPS? And in HTTPS, I can either generate a self-signed cert or I can import a cert for a domain name that I own if I want to do that. In general, you want to use HTTPS because it's encrypted end-to-end, and obviously that prevents data being man in the middle. But for this demo, I don't have a cert, and I'm not going to try and generate a self-signed cert because browsers and everything else don't trust them automatically. Okay, so that's it. That's my server up and running. That only took us a few minutes to get running. So at the moment, it's not doing anything. It doesn't do anything for us, okay? So in another tab, what I'm going to do is I'm going to install a REST API that I've previously written, okay? It's in a bunch of scripts. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to create a schema. I'm going to ORDS enable that schema. I'm going to create some tables in that schema. I'm going to insert some sample data into that schema, and then I'm going to insert some REST definitions that allow you to interact with that data, with those tables, okay? Okay, so I'll just do install. Okay, so it goes off and runs a bunch of DDL, DML, and invokes our REST APIs to set up that REST API. And I'll come back in a minute and show you the definitions of those, but I just want to get something up and running, okay? So if I go to localhost 8080, that's the port that my standalone server is running on, and I go to this URL here, my tickets and metadata catalog. Okay, I get back a JSON resource. Now, I have installed in my browser an add-on, a Chrome add-on that renders JSON nicely. If you were to just, I can just do this. Okay, it's going to look like this normally, okay, if you don't have that add-on installed, okay? And just to talk about this resource a bit, So /ORDS is where ORDS is listening for requests. Tickets is the alias that we have given our schema, and so that's routing us to the tickets database schema. Bigger. Let me just go full screen on that. Okay. All right. Fortunately, it doesn't make this line up here any bigger. Yep. The question was, what web browser is it? And it's Google Chrome. Yeah. So as I said, it's an add-in for Chrome. You go to the Chrome store and you add in, I forget what the plugin is called. It's JSON parse or something like that. Okay. Sorry, you had a question?
What have you done so far? You create the server and the web application to process the ORDS. I saw you use a WAR file to download it.
Yep.
So is that a server running locally?
Yes. Okay, so the question is, just to recap what we have done so far. So let me go back to my terminal. I have this terminal here is running a Java process. Okay? It's running a WAR file that we've packaged it in such a way that it embeds a application server in it called Jetty. And that starts up Jetty, and then it deploys the WAR into it, and it all runs in place. So it's pretty neat. You don't have to do a separate deployment step and all of that kind of stuff. So that's there, that's running, that's listening on where's our browser gone? That's listening on port 8080, okay, at /ORDS. And we have, and I'll show this in a second, I'll show you the PL SQL script that caused this to be enabled, but just take it that we enabled this schema called tickets, and we've actually given it the same alias tickets, but we could give it any alias we want, okay? And then by default, ORDS produces a resource for you called the metadata catalog. It's called metadata catalog because internally in Oracle we have a standard on how we want our REST APIs to be structured, and the standard mandates that we have a resource called metadata catalog. Its job is to list out what are the REST APIs that are available. Okay, so that's what it's doing here. We have this items element as an array, and it's listing out a bunch of URLs that we can go to see particular resources. Okay. So I can click on any of those and it will take me to that actual resource, okay? Now, if I do that in the browser, I haven't provided any credentials, okay? So it's going to deny me access, all right? Because you don't want your data to be public. Now, we have a facility in ORDS ourselves. We have conflicts of desires in ORDS. We don't want to be in the security business, okay? Lots of great Oracle products that can manage the security for you, be it Oracle WebLogic, be it Oracle Access Manager, Oracle Identity Manager, whatever. We don't want to be in that business. But at the same time, we have to give you something to let you build and develop a system in one box. We don't want to be saying, well, now if you want to add security, you got to go off and learn about this whole other stuff. So out of the box, we give you a simple facility to store credentials in a text-based file. It's basically like an /etc password file, okay? It's not something we intend you to use in production, but it suffices to get you going. And then on top of that, we have a web-based sign-in mechanism that lets you authorize against that credential store. Okay, so I'm just going to do that here just so that I can show you what the actual payload of the REST API looks like. I forgot a step. I'm usually using a setup data. I did not set up a user for this. So I will have to go back to my terminal. I will have to stop my server briefly for a minute. I'm going to run another command. So one of the nice things about ords.war is we can do a help command, and it will list out all of the commands that are available, okay? So these are various configuration commands that you can do. So the command I'm interested in is user, which is going to create this user for me. And I'm going to create a user called, I'm just going to call him Colm. Okay. And I'm going to give him a specific role, and I happen to know, because I wrote these APIs, tickets user is the role that the user must have to be able to access this API, okay? So it's going to prompt me for a password, confirm, okay. As I said, it shows you that the file that it created it in. And then I'm just gonna run ords.war again. Okay, it's going to start back up with the same settings that I was running with before. I can go back to Chrome. This time I get in, right? Okay, so now I can see the resource. So what's actually happening here, if you care at a web level, is that sign-in page created a cookie, and that cookie is being sent back by the browser on every request, and it's asserting who the user's identity is. Okay, so now we're seeing a list of, this is in REST terminology, this is a collection of resources, okay? So this is giving a list of these tickets. The whole idea of this thing is it's like a ticketing support system, that kind of thing, task management kind of API, okay? Yes. So the question is this something I developed before and I didn't quite capture the second bit? Yeah. So I injected a load of REST service definitions into the database. Okay, and these are the outputs of those definitions. And I'll show them in just a second now. This is the list, this is called the collection resource, and then we can click into the details. So this isn't showing much detail, it's showing the title and the ID. And then we can click into the actual resource and we're going to get a lot more detail in the resource, okay? We're getting the actual description and it happens to be marked up in a certain way and who created it and when. And then we have some nested data, these category elements, how we classified it and all that kind of stuff, okay? And then we have the hyperlinks, okay? Remember at the start I said that a REST API should be self-describing. It should let you take you from one place to the next, okay? Just to go back and show a good case of that. So we support pagination. Now this I only have 2 tickets here, so it's and 25 items per page, so I'm only getting a single page. But if there was more than 25 items, there would be a next link here that would point to the next page in the resources and take me there, okay? And that's a great example of hyperlinks being applied. I don't need to know how to get to the next page. I just need to know that there's a next link I can follow and it'll tell me the URL to go to. And if the pagination strategy changes over time, if the pagination size changes over time, then I don't care, I'm blind to all of that, okay? So, just to show you quickly these REST API definitions, again, I will bump up I will bump up the text size now again. Okay. Fortunately, the lights make it rather difficult to see that color scheme. Okay, so I'll just try and highlight this. Does that make it any clearer? So this first statement here, so this is a PL/SQL script, same as you write any other PL/SQL script for the database, okay? And it's calling a package, a public synonym that we defined when we did that installation process called ORDS. And it has a procedure in it called enable schema. And what that does is it can take overloaded parameters, but in this case it's using the default, it's using the current schema and making that available to ORDS, making it accessible to the web, okay? So from that point on, the /metadata catalog resource will become available. That's the manifestation of doing that invocation. Then we have a number of different ways to build the REST resources, okay? So I talked about enabling a view or a table. So I have a view called tickets feed, and I call this enable object, and I give its name and tell it that it's a view. And that will, because the database has such rich metadata about all of your tables and views, just giving us the name of a table or a view is enough for us to create a complete RESTful definition for that resource. Because we know what the columns are, we know what their types are, we know, we can obviously query the values of them, all of that kind of stuff. So we can produce a collection resource that will allow you to navigate through that entire view, okay? For a single line statement, and for tables, we can, and also for updatable views, we can generate the posts to create a resource, put to replace, to update the resource, delete to delete, okay? So that's a lot of value for not a huge amount of effort. And there's even more to it in terms of how we support what are called Etags and optimistic concurrency and all of that kind of stuff. So we do some fairly strong stuff and deep stuff in terms of our REST support, but we don't have time to get into all of that today. So we're enabling another object, categories. This is a table in this case, so by default the object type is table, so we don't need to specify it there. Now, this is an example of writing a manual, more manual REST service, okay? We call them resource modules, okay? We have a kind of a one-shot API, which we call define service, which will create a module and what we call a resource template within that, and within that a resource handler, okay? So each module, we give it a prefix. In this case, we're choosing /tickets, okay? And then we give it a pattern. And we have a couple of significant, really only one kind of special pattern. This means the dot is like in Unix, dot means this folder. So /tickets dot just means /tickets, okay? So we're defining the resource handler for the /tickets resource, okay? And we could have /foo, /whatever. Under there, we can define child resources under there as well if we want. And that's bound to a SQL query. Let me try and expand that out. I'll just Control-C that and Control-V and then do toggle soft wrap. Okay. So it's not very nicely formatted, but we're selecting from the tickets table. Okay. We're ordering by the created on descending, so we're showing the most recently created tickets first, okay? And then we have this special ability to say what the primary key column of the resource is by using this, and this is specific to ORDS, this is our extra functionality. If a column alias is $ID, we know that that means that the child item is identified by that particular column, okay? And we will construct a URL that points to that column, okay? So we were defining the tickets resource. So if we go back to the web browser and we have, we go back to the tickets resource, okay. Keep going back. Okay, so we find the tickets resource. Okay, what's actually happening here is a slightly different version of it where I called it /mytickets. It's the same REST service essentially. So this ID column, we render it, we include it, okay, but we also generate this self link, which is /mytickets/1, okay? Because the service said $ID, told us what the unique key column was. And you can have multiple keys. It doesn't have to be a single key. We can concatenate them in a way that we can parse them back into their component parts. Okay, so then we go on and we can enhance that module to add in a post handler And in this case, it's a PL SQL block. And we're dealing with the request body, which will be a blob, okay? Because it could be any data. It's not just character data. It could be binary data. It could be an image, a movie, whatever, okay? So in our case, we want to just pass that on to a PL SQL API that we've defined. I would always recommend that if you're designing a PL SQL based application, that you define a PL SQL API to encapsulate your interaction with the database objects. You know, I wouldn't go straight to having DML straight in your anonymous block, okay? It'll help you to test it. It'll help you to reuse that code down the line if you put it into PL SQL packages, okay? So this package is taking the payload, which is a blob, and I can drill into that, but very briefly, all it's doing is converting it to a blob and then using the JSON functionality that's in the 12c database to project that JSON data into a relational form and then do inserts into the database tables from that relational projection of the JSON data, okay? That sounds complicated, but it's actually fairly, it's pretty straightforward. If I find this create ticket method down here, this is what we're doing. This is we're projecting that into a cursor, and then we're doing an insert off of that. Okay. All right. It's a fair bit of PL SQL code, but I tell you that's a lot less code than you would do using Java or even Ruby or whatever to do that same kind of operation. Okay. So I think that's quite a big win. Okay. So just to go back to the presentation and make sure I have recapped my agenda. So I've done the installation, I've done REST enabling a table and a view. I've showed you how to create complex APIs using SQL and PL SQL. And so I guess the next step is to show you how do you use that API from an Oracle Jet application. All right. Before we go on that, any questions on the PL SQL stuff and how that works? Okay. Actually, I'll show you one other thing. Maybe PL SQL isn't your thing, okay? Maybe you would prefer to work with this in a more visual fashion. And so the team that produces SQL Developer is the same team that produces ORDS, okay? So we have strong integration for ORDS in SQL Developer, okay? So this is Oracle SQL Developer. I'm sure pretty much everybody in the room is familiar with it. I can't remember how to increase my font size, Jeff. How do I increase the font? Yep. Code editor. What? You punking me? Okay. Okay. All right. All right. So unfortunately, I can't really make these widgets on the side here, but this is my ticket schema that I created earlier. Okay. And so one of the new features that's coming in the next version of SQL Developer is the ability to interact with REST data services, same as you would as a table, a view, a procedure, or a package. It's a top-level object in your hierarchy, in your connections view. Okay, so if we expand that, we're going to see some modules, privileges, and roles. So modules are, like I previously explained, manually defined RESTful services that you've created. Okay, privileges. Pardon me. Right, I've never stumbled on that before. Privileges define how you protect access to those resources. So you recall when I went to the REST API, it denied me access because I had set up a privilege to restrict access to users with a particular role And these roles are kind of just logical roles that we define, your application level roles. When you do a proper security integration, you'll have to have some mechanism to map those logical roles to actual physical roles, maybe based on your HR org position or something like that. So we have this tickets user role that you saw me give myself to be able to get access to this, okay? So if we look at the modules, we can drill into them. We've got this, my tickets module. This is the get handler, okay? And I can double click, I can edit that, okay? And that's going to show me it nicely syntax highlighted in the SQL worksheet. And I'm actually connected as that, and I can actually fire that query. Oh, and this is one thing I forgot to mention when I was explaining how the service works. When you've authenticated a user in ORDS, we create an implicit bind variable for your statement called current_user, which is the identity of the user that you've authenticated as. Okay, so it's asking for the value. So I happen to know it should be Colm. I'm going to press it, apply, and it's going to give me back those values. Okay, so within SQL Developer, you can quickly iterate, create your queries, and edit them and whatever, and attach them to your REST service definitions. Okay. So that's another maybe more intuitive, more friendly way to define your services. And under the covers, when it's presenting this data, we define a bunch of user_ords_modules, templates, handlers, views that it's querying to populate all of this tree here. And when you go to create a new module, you give it a name. Does it show us the SQL? At the end. Okay. Test. Okay. Next. And so we can see in here that this is the PL/SQL API invocations that you need to do to define this in our repository. Okay, so it's a visual UI over these API invocations. You're doing it the exact same way. You're just doing it in a more GUI orientated way. Okay, one of the nice things about this is that you can get this right click and REST definitions, and you can save the file. So say you've just been playing around, you've created a bunch of elements within the SQL Developer UI, but you don't have a script to back that up. You didn't save any of those definitions. Well, we can query the repository and regenerate the set of PL/SQL API invocations to replay all of those invocations. So that allows you to easily go from your dev environment into your test into your production. Okay. All right. So let's get back to our REST API. Okay. So I am going to, at this point, shut down this server because I don't have the static resources set up that I need for this. I need a bunch of HTML and JavaScript and CSS for the Jet UI, but I do have them in running in my development environment. Okay, so I'm just going to start up my development server, and it's pretty much the exact same as running it in the console, but it's pointing at those static resources. Okay. Let me go back to Chrome. Okay, so I'm going to go localhost 8080. Okay. And this is going to bring up this Jet application. Hopefully, I'm just remembering that I probably ran the wrong definition of the REST API still. Oh no, there we go. It came up. Just came up for a second. Now, interestingly here, right, it didn't ask me to sign in. It probably will ask me to sign in sometime in the next few minutes because it's about an hour since I first signed in. and the session times out after an hour. But because I'd already signed in manually to show you the REST APIs, I'm already signed into this as well, so it's not prompting me to sign in. But this is the Jet UI. I know it doesn't look pretty. I'm a server-side guy. I don't really have GUI skills, okay? But, and I've blown up the size of the text to make it look good on screen, okay? So, you know, I'm sorry, it's not like an Apex GUI, but I don't have their skills when it comes to the presentation side of things. So this is my activity feed. This is showing me that list of tickets that I have, okay? And same as you would in a regular browser application, I can hover over things and see there's hyperlinks, and I can click those hyperlinks, okay? And it will take me to the actual definition of that. Now I've got the, what's going on here is I've turned up the logging to the nth degree in my development environment, so it's running quite slowly. So again, Sod's Law. I go on developer tools. We'll see what's happening. Console. Okay, state ID my design. Yeah, okay. So I've got the wrong version of the services. Okay. Bear with me for 2 seconds. It will only take me 2 seconds to fix that. Okay. I just want to disconnect. You cannot drop a schema user while you're connected to them. I just want to drop them and recreate them. Uninstall. Okay, I'm going to cd. Okay. Yeah, add install. Okay, it's going to recreate all the APIs. It's going to recreate the ones that actually match my GUI. I can just go back in here. Okay, we'll reload the page. Okay, all right, and I can click on it. And this time it will show me the detail of it. Now, an interesting thing that you might have noticed there is that I dropped the whole schema and repopulated it and reset it up, and I didn't have to restart my ORDS server, okay? That talks to how we connect to your schema and how long we connect to your schema for, okay? So the way we connect to the ticket schema is that we connect the connection pool that ORDS is using connects as a user called ORDS public user. When you do the enable schema API call, that is granting tickets, ORDS public user the ability to proxy to the ticket schema, okay? So it can proxy to that schema without any further credentials being required. It executes the statement that we saw, the select statement or whatever, as that schema. So it all evaluates correctly in terms of access control and all of that kind of stuff. Then we're done. Then we close the proxy connection. Then we return the ORDS public user connection to the pool. So we never actually hold on to that tickets connection for very long. And so that means that we can easily manipulate the tickets schema, do maintenance on it, change definitions, whatever, and it doesn't affect ORDS running at the time. So that can help with when you're iterating. Okay, so all we're doing in this is turning that JSON data that's coming back from the server into some slightly prettier, dare I say, HTML, okay? And we can change data. I can just say, okay, scope 17, and I can take that, okay, it's changed the HTML there because but that's all happening at client side. Nothing's done when I press the update operation. Okay. We'll fix that. Will have updated the data on the database, and I can go back in to my dashboard okay, it will retrieve this, and you'll see the updated data. Okay, just to show you in the browser tools, the requests that are going up and down. This is kind of a bit hard to see on this UI, but I'll do a normal reload, and that might show us something interesting. Okay. So, see all these gets, and they're coming back with a 304 status. Does anybody know what the 304 status means? No? Okay, what it means is that it's a way for the browser, for the server to signal to the browser that they already have the most recent version of that resource, and they don't need to send it over the wire again, okay? And the reason that it's even responding with that way is that if you look at the request, the headers, the browser sends up this thing called an etag, okay? So if you send down a resource with an etag, the browser will remember that when it's storing it in its cache, and next time it asks for it, it does what's called a conditional get, and it says, can you get me this resource if it's not this version? If it is this version, all it has to do is a very short message, 304, you got it, okay? And we move on to rendering the next resource, fetching the next resource, and whatever. So it really improves the latency of your GUI. So ORDS has support for Etags built in. Okay, we're able to generate an Etag for any resource by default for you. Now, in some cases, you might need to turn that off because generating an Etag for a large resource can be really expensive. But by default, we leave it on because that's the most useful setting. Okay, so you're also getting that functionality without having to do anything. You don't have to code that functionality up yourself. You don't have to write extra logic in your PL/SQL layer to deal with Etags or anything like that. Okay, so ORDS is doing all of that for you. What else can I show you in terms of this? So that's the resource. I just want to show you the ticket item. No, that's JavaScript. I can show you a little bit in terms of the, so this is a resource that we requested, okay, and response is that's the HTML. Yeah, it's this resource here, okay? So we're getting back a bunch of JSON with the detail of the resource in it, okay? And so that's what's being rendered into HTML. In terms of the Jet code, now, when I started building this demo, I didn't know Jet from anything, okay? So it's a relatively new framework that Oracle released last year, went open source last year. It's actually designed around a component-based architecture, okay? So it's quite similar in terms of what I was talking about at the start of the presentation about Visual Basic. So it has a rich set of GUI components. They keep changing the URL that you go to, so I just Google it. Okay, so they've got this great resource called the cookbook, which basically is every component with examples of how to use it. Okay, so that example I showed you was built by going to the cookbook, looking for something that looked like what I needed, copy and pasting the code, tweaking it until it worked, and whatever. One of the nice things that it has a built-in concept of support of the idea of a resource collection, okay? This list of items that you drill down into details for, okay? And so we're able to leverage that where the activity feed you saw there earlier is basically a version of the list view component, okay? So we're able to reuse all of that logic, and despite our two products being developed by two different teams in two different parts of the world and never communicating with each other, it was actually very straightforward for me to hook our REST APIs into an Oracle Jet application and start using them without a whole lot of effort. Now, it does require you to understand JavaScript. It's definitely not a beginner level framework. It's you need to be a competent JavaScript developer to be able to use it. But if you've already done that, then it's very easy to use this product to build rich UIs on top of our REST APIs. So with that, I'm about done. If there's any questions, I'm happy to take them. And if not, then perhaps everybody can go get ready for the party. Okay, first question.
You mentioned the PLC gateway with Apex
Mm-hmm.
using a different schema.
Yeah.
With that divergence, are those ever going to come back together? If you have a bunch of stuff in Apex REST services.
Yeah. Okay, so the question is, it's alluding to a feature that's already present in Oracle Application Express. So earlier in the life cycle of ORDS, when we first added RESTful functionality to it, we did that by piggybacking on the Application Express product, and that was a good reason for it. At the time, the product was called the Apex Listener, and it was very tightly coupled to Apex. And so we introduced new tables in the Apex schema to store all of the RESTful service definitions. And so then a strong feedback that we got from a lot of customers was, we really like that, but we don't use Apex. Can you make it independent? So we did make it independent, and unfortunately that involved taking it out of the Apex schema. So now at the moment we have what we call legacy Apex REST services, which we still continue to support and dispatch, same as we always did. And then we have the ORDS-based REST services. And the ORDS-based REST services is where further development is going to happen. They comply with the Oracle REST standard. They have richer capabilities, all of this kind of stuff. What's happening in the background is that we are working with the Apex team to figure out a way for them to migrate the existing Apex-based REST services to use ORDS-based REST services, so that the data would migrate out of the Apex repository into the ORDS one. The 4850 app that you use to define your REST services in Apex would be interacting with those ORDS APIs that I showed you in SQL Developer, rather than directly with the tables and all that kind of stuff.
So that is being worked. What's the time frame?
I started the presentation, I showed this slide. I think that answers your question, yeah? Okay.
I want to know, should we do it ourselves or do we wait?
I would recommend that if you're investing in REST services, I would, so I should say there's already a facility in ORDS to do a migration from your Apex-based REST services to ORDS-based REST services. Okay, so you can export them out of Apex and into ORDS, but then they're not in Apex anymore, right? So that's the gap that you will have to deal with. But like I showed you, there's rich UI in SQL Developer to define them that is more or less equivalent to what you would do in Apex. Okay. Sorry, this gentleman.
Can you show us a small sample of code of the JavaScript consuming the ORDS call? Or?
Sure. Yeah, can I do that in a minute and I'll answer this gentleman's question?
I know AF also supports web service out of box framework.
So which?
Application development framework.
Yes.
So that also out of box supports web service. How that is different from RDS?
So IDF is for Java folks, I would say, right? This is aimed at folks who are database developers and want to REST enable their database, and it's aimed also at JavaScript developers who just want to REST enable the database without learning about Java, about ADF, about Fusion, all of that kind of stuff. Okay, so that's the difference. So the question was, can we see any code that shows how ORDS talks to the? That scared everyone off. Okay, thank you for coming today. Okay, so in Jet, okay, So we have a source folder, JS. Okay. So to explain it well, you need to know a bit about Jet, and Jet is what's called an MV model view controller. Okay, it's a whole lot of M's and a whole lot of V's and a bit of a C. Okay, and the idea is that you have a model, okay, which represents your data. You have a view model, which is a projection of that data into a form that's useful for your UI. Okay, and then you have a view, which is a rendering of that data, and it's typically just HTML. So this guy is basically a bridge between the model and the view. Okay, MVC, it was called a controller, but it's not a controller apparently. It's a view model. Okay, I don't see the big delineation between it, but whatever. So. Just trying to recall here. So we have a model. Okay, so one of the things that I realized is that because of the Oracle REST standard, our collections are so uniform that we don't really need to model an actual separate entity, a separate JavaScript file for each type of item. There isn't a ticket model, because what I was able to do was create a collection factory. Now, I know that whenever I mention the word factory, people see that I'm a Java developer, and JavaScript people go, basically. But what we do is basically generate a type on the fly, okay, that represents the ticket model, okay? So it's really a whole load of gobbledygook in terms of we're just merging in, we're taking out the HTML, the link, okay, and we're providing a way to generate that based on the ID and back and forth and stuff like that, and merging in the properties and all this kind of stuff. This is the method that is actually retrieving an item, okay? So it's, what's it doing there? It's merging a bunch of options together, and it's overriding what the URL is. So out of the box, Jet follows that paradigm of it's, the child item is /1/2, whatever. It has that baked in, okay? And like I said, that's not so great, because if that ever changes for some reason, then it can't evolve. So we're overriding it here to actually examine the resource, the item URL that came back in the resource, and use that instead, okay? So that's how we're tweaking it to be a little bit more RESTful in our view. And then we're doing, we've cached the original fetch function that Jet gave us, and we're delegating to that with that overridden URL. And that's all we have to do to make it totally RESTful, that it's following the links that's coming back.
What is this application? You're editing, what is it, an ID or something?
Oh, yeah, it's the black thing.
Oh yeah, it's an editor called Atom. It's from GitHub.
What is that?
GitHub. You know the company GitHub? GitHub. I know I'm saying it in an Irish accent. GitHub. Okay. Okay. All right. I'll say it even more incoherently tonight when I've had a few drinks in me. Okay. And GitHub make it, and I think it's I'm sure it's an open source thing, GitHub Atom.
Okay.
Right? So, yeah.
Is that your example we can try somewhere?
We haven't released it, and whenever I get time, I will get it released on GitHub under our, under GitHub, we have a database tools area, and we will be releasing it under there at some stage. Yeah. All right. Okay. Thanks for your time.